All right, we're moving on to chapter 10, and chapter 10 is standard cost and variances. And there are going to be some similarities to the last chapter. In the last chapter, we had a flexible budget, and that was okay, based on this volume, what should our revenue and cost be? And we compare that to actual. And this is the last chapter for before exam 3 and project 3. So these are all tied together, and then your project will be based on information from these 3 chapters. And now we're actually talking about the manufacturing process. And the manufacturing process, as we know, we assign overhead based on either process costing or job costing or activity based costing. And now we're going to look into what's called standard cost. And so those really are standard cost. As you know, we will estimate the amount of overhead based on the estimated factor. If it's direct labor hours, if it's the number of design changes, etc. And so in a manufacturing environment, you can't really wait around to collect the information. So you come up with what's called standards. So in other words, you look at a car and you go, these are the parts that go into this car, and we know what we paid for this car or for these parts. So this is the bill of materials. So we know that to make this car, it should cost X dollars in materials. And same thing with direct labor. We know that there should be so many hours spent by each department to assemble this, and we know what the rate should be. And so we come up with the standard for labor cost. And then we already know, or we've already estimated the overhead, and we're going to assign that based on whatever factor we use. And so these are all estimates, and they're the standards. So we think a car should cost this much. Now at the end of the month, we make adjustments, and we either adjust the different inventories or we just allocate everything to cost of goods sold. So what we're going to do here, though, is we're going to again start breaking down variances between standards and what actually happened, and then we're going to look at different components so that we can get an idea of how to fix the problem. So price standards specify how much should be paid for each unit. Quantity is how much we should use. So we should use 4 tires for a car. We should use X number of bolts for a car, etc. Standard price per unit is the final delivered cost of materials net of discounts. Quantity is summarized in the bill of material. Standard rate per hour is okay. We opt a single rate to use. It reflects a mix of wages earned and standard hours. They do time motion studies. And again, if they think, well, it should take 2 hours, it may take an hour and 50 minutes, some might 2 hours and 10 minutes, but on average, it should take 2 hours to complete this project. Price standard is the rate, the variable portion of the predetermined overhead rate, and quantity is the activity in the allocation base for predetermined overhead. So if we're assigning direct labor hours, then we know this is our standard. So this would be the standard cost for this product. We've done a study and we know that we should use 3 pounds of materials, and it should cost us $4 per pound, so that's $12. We know that we should use 2.5 hours of direct labor at $14 an hour, so that's $35. And we're assigning overhead by direct labor hours, so that's $3 per hour, $7.50. So this part should cost us $54.50 to make. That's the standard. So standard cost per unit for direct material, labor, and variable overhead can be used to compute activity and spending variances, just like we did in the prior chapter. So we're going to do the variance analysis, and we're going to break it down to, again, is it the price variance because we paid more or less for the parts, or is it the quantity variance? Did we use more or less of the parts? If for some reason we used 5 tires, and I don't know why we would, maybe the tire got damaged or something, then that would be a quantity variance. And the price variance would be if we paid more for each tire. And we separate these for 2 reasons. One is because of the responsibility. Purchasing manager is the one responsible for getting all of the parts. And so they go and they say, well, we're going to need 10,000 tires. So they go out and they source 10,000 tires and however many steering wheels, etc. And the buying and using the activities occur at different times. Variance analysis, the price variance. So it's not just materials, but it's the labor rate. So the hourly rate we pay, the benefit cost that we pay, and the variable overhead that we assign. So, we have a standard cost of the depreciation on the equipment, depreciation on the building, the manager's salary, etc. And then the quantity variance, again, did we use more or less materials? Did we use more or less labor hours? Which, if we use more or less labor hours, that's going to make this variable overhead change as well. So this looks a little complicated. But what we're going to start is that we're going to have the actual quantity at the actual price. So this is really what we paid, okay? And then first we're going to find the price variance. And so we're just going to separate the price difference in the price based on the quantity we actually used. All right, so again, we're looking at the price variance and the quantity variance. And so the variance for the price is going to be the difference in the cost per unit times the actual units that we use. So that's going to take out the difference in the price. And then over here, we're going to use the standard price because we've already accounted for the price difference and the difference in the number of hours. And so this component is how much more did we pay or how much less did we pay per unit? And this, again, how many units did we use? And together, they're going to determine what the spending variance is. One could be positive, one could be negative, or both could be both. Actual quantity is the amount of direct materials, direct labor, or variable manufacturing overhead actually used. Standard is what we thought we would use. Price is what we actually paid. Standard is what we said we would pay. All right, so we're going to do some computations. So we have 0.1 kilograms of fiber fill per parka at $5 per kilogram. So our standard really is going to be $5 times 0.1 or 50 cents per kilogram. Last month, 210 kilograms of fiber fill were purchased and used to make 2,000 parkers. The materials cost a total of $1,029. So now what we're going to need to do first is to figure out, all right, what is the price per kilogram? Okay, and the price per kilogram is going to be 1,029 divided by 210 kilograms, and that's $4.90 per kilogram. So even before computation, you already know that you're going to have a favorable price variance because you paid $4.90 instead of $5. The other thing we're going to look at is, okay, how much did we use? Well, we made 2010 Parkers. And so for 2010 2,000 Parkers, that's divided by 10, you should have used 200 kilograms. So again, without even really computing this, we know that we're going to be over. We used more kilograms than what our standard is, because at point one, we should have used 2,000. And so that difference is going to be multiplied by the $5 per kilogram, and that's going to give us the volume variance. So 210 kilograms times 490 is what we actually used, 1,029. And so the actual quantity, which was 210 kilograms, times the standard price is 1,050. So we know that because 490 is less than $5, that we have a favorable price variance of $21. However, we should have used 210 kilograms, but we only used 200. So that's a difference of 10 kilograms. And we've already accounted for the difference in the price. So we're going to multiply the 10 times the 5, and really that gets you the $50 here, or 1,000 minus 50. So we have an unfavorable quantity variance. We used more than what we thought we would, but we saved a little. So the net variance is going to be a negative $29. And here are the computations. I mean, this looks more complicated than really it is. Really, you just want to say, okay, what is the price that we paid per unit versus what we were going to pay? That difference times the number of units we used is going to give you the price variance. And then the quantity variance is just how much should we use, how much did we use. That difference times the standard price, it will give you the quantity variance. Okay. So the purchasing manager again is responsible for the material price variance. The production manager is responsible for the material's quantity variance. However, so the standard price is used to compute the quantity variance so that the production manager is not held responsible for the purchasing manager's performance. However, what if the purchasing manager bought inferior material so that you had to use it more? Then in actuality, the production manager would be held responsible for using more of a product when it really is because the purchasing manager bought inferior material. Let's see, the material variance is not always entirely controllable by one person or department. Production manager may schedule production in such a way it requires express delivery of raw materials, resulting in an unfavorable materials price variance. So that way, the production manager could negatively impact the purchasing manager. And then again, the purchasing manager may purchase lower quality materials. So you have to take this with a grain of salt, and you have to really look at what the problem was. So we're going to do a quick check here, but Hansen has the following direct material standard to manufacture one zippy. So 1 pound per zippy at $4 per pound. We made 1,000 zippies, so we already know the quantity is more because 1,000 times 1.5 is 1,500 pounds. So we know we're going to have a quantity variance, and it's really going to be the 1,700 minus the 1,500. That's 200 times the $4. So we're going to have a quantity variance that's unfavorable by 1,800. And now we look at, okay, well, the material is $4 per pound. We paid a total of 6,630. So 6,630 divided by 1,700 pounds that we actually used is we paid $3.90 per pound. So that's lower than what our standard was. So we know we're going to have a favorable price variance. How many pounds of material should Hansen have used to make 1,000 zippies? At 1.5 times 1,000, it should be 1,500 pounds. So our variance is the 200 pounds times the standard cost of 4, and so it should be $800. And then what is our material price variance for the week was 800 unfavorable. Or hold on, material, a material. Oh, price was favorable. Yes. So that is again the actual quantity times the difference in the price. So that's zero point 0.1 times 1700, which is 170. And because the actual price was less than the standard, that's a favorable variance. So we had an $800 unfavorable variance for quantity and a $770 favorable variance for price. So the net is that we used $630 more than what we had expected. And so this is exactly the same process for whether it's direct material, whether it's direct labor, or where it's variable overhead. So we're just going to kind of skip through these. But again, all right, 1.2 standard hours per parka at $10 per hour. So we made 2,000 parkers. And so 2,000 parkers times 1.2 would be 2,400. So we're going to have a favorable um, quantity variance here. Now, $10 per hour. So how many hours did we actually work? We worked 2,500 hours. So we look at the total cost of 26,250 divided by 2,500 hours, and that's equal to $10.50 per hour. So we're going to have an unfavorable um, price variance. And so together they're going to work. So we've got, we're paying 50 cents more an hour, so that's unfavorable, but we used 100 hours less. And so we're going to go through the same process, and we're going to get the efficiency variance was unfavorable because we used hours, 24 hours. Okay, so used more. So basically, it was my math is off. Yes, we should have used 1.2. We should have used 2,400. My mistake. We used 2,500. So we're going to have an unfavorable variance both for quantity and for price. And together, that's going to be 2,250. So, who's responsible for labor variance? Production managers are usually held accountable because they can influence key factors. So, what is the skill levels? What's the motivation? What is the quality of the supervisor? What is the quality of the training? So, maybe you had to hire new employees, and this month there was a learning curve. So if I'm going to my boss and I'm trying to explain these variants, I'm just going to say, look, it was new employees. We've now trained them, so we expect the efficiency to improve. But the labor market is such that we just couldn't get anybody in unless we paid more. And those are the reasons. And so you may need to do a little more training to get them to be more efficient. It could also be the fact that, yeah, the maintenance department may do a poor job maintaining the production equipment. So you needed more labor because the equipment was slower. And the purchasing manager may purchase lower quality materials, resulting in unfavorable labor efficiency variance for the production manager. So there's a lot of things that can happen that aren't obvious. Let's see, following, and this I think is just for the labor rate variance. Let's go back. All right, so 1.5 standard hours per zippy at $12 per direct labor hour. All right, so 1,550 direct labor hours were worked at a total cost of 1810. So what is the labor cost per hour? That's 18,910. 18,910 divided by 1,550 equals 1,220. So we're going to have an unfavorable labor cost variance of 20 cents, and we multiply that by the actual um, hours. And so that should be a $310 unfavorable labor quantity variance. And then we have 12 or labor price variance. And then we made 1,000, and our standard is 1.5, so that's 1,500. So we can see that that's going to be an unfavorable variance as well of 50 hours. 50 times the standard of 12 would be 600. So I believe that's 300 or 310 unfavorable. Again, the difference in 20 cents times the actual hours used. And then the efficiency variance was unfavorable because we used more hours, 50 more hours times the standard rate. And so here we're off by 910. And again, you start going through the process again. I'm just going to go through this quickly because same issue, except here, if you use more labor hours, you're automatically going to use more overhead. So that in itself, and if you use more labor hours, you might end up over applying overhead because you expected as X number of hours and you used X plus 10%. And so you are going to be absorbing more overhead than actuality, assuming that your overhead amount is correct. And so you have to take this with a little grain of salt because it is dependent upon labor hours. So if your labor hours are off, that's going to throw this off as well. But the computations are still the same. All right, advantage of standard costs. Standard costs are a key element of the management by exception approach. They can provide benchmarks, say this is what it should cost, how come it costs more. They can simplify bookkeeping because then you already are pricing or costing the cars or whatever your product is at a standard, and then you can go and see what the difference is. And so you set standards and then you find out whether you're meeting those. Potential problems. Cost variance reports are usually prepared on a monthly basis and may contain outdated information. That is certainly true. If variants are misused as a club to negatively reinforce employees, morale may suffer. Labor variances assume the production process is labor paced and that labor is a variable cost. These assumptions are often invalid in today's automatic manufacturing environment where employees are essentially a fixed cost. Just meeting the standards may not be sufficient. Continuous improvement may be necessary. In some cases, a favorable variance can be as bad as or worse than an unfavorable variance. Excessive emphasis on meeting the standards may overshadow other important things such as maintaining, improving quality, on-time delivery, and customer satisfaction. So these last two chapters, we've looked at budgeting, and then we've looking at the actual results and comparing them to what the budget says we should do. It allows us to see how we did, but also to evaluate how our budget was. Were our assumptions correct? Do we need to make adjustments to that? And so these three chapters are very useful to managers so that you can help determine what the issue is and then make corrections.